Hello and welcome back to Sleepy Hollow Whispers. Before we begin, feel free to leave a comment and tell me where you're listening from. I love reading every single one. If you enjoy drifting into dark, chilling tales whispered from the mists of Sleepy Hollow, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Turn on notifications so you never miss a new story. Now get comfortable, dim the lights if you dare, relax your mind. Let the outside world fade away. And let's begin. Story 1. I am writing this by the light of a candle that is almost finished. If you find these pages, I do not wish harm on you. I truly don't. But I have run out of choices, and I do not know if I will still be myself by the time you read this. The food is spoiled. The water tastes like something dead is soaking in it. Colt and Will are gone. I have no one left to stand between me and her, or the trees, or whatever moves through them. She keeps calling for me, soft and patient, like she knows I will eventually obey. And the worst part is that my own body is starting to feel like it is turning against me. I can still fight with my mind, but my strength is fading. I live near the town of Wilter Spring. My husband and I were born in these hills, and we have never known any other life. My name is Mary Failder. My husband is Jonathan Failder. He built our small home a distance away from town so he could work the forest for lumber. I tended the land around the house. I grew what I could, stored what I could, and tried to keep a quiet order to our days. Jonathan helped when he had the time, though most of the work was mine because the forest always demanded more of him than I liked. Our life was peaceful, even with its hard edges. The Lord never blessed us with children, and I won't pretend it didn't ache sometimes, especially in the winter when the nights felt long and the house felt too quiet. But we loved each other. We told ourselves that we didn't need more than that. We had our routines, our prayers, our meals, our work. We had 2 dogs, Colt and Will. They were good dogs, the kind that make a lonely place feel less lonely. Colt was bolder, always the first to step outside. Will stayed closer, watchful and careful, as if she could sense what the eye could not. Not long after winter began to loosen its grip, there came a knock at our door one night, hard enough to make the whole frame rattle. The wind was loud and sharp outside, pushing snow against the walls. Jonathan didn't like surprises, and he didn't trust anyone who appeared at our door after dark. I watched him lift his old rifle before he even spoke. He took one step toward the door, listening, and called out to ask who it was. An old man answered, his voice strained by the cold. He apologized for disturbing us on such a stormy night. He said he had been traveling toward Wilter Spring, but the wind had turned so fierce he could not continue. He asked permission to stay until morning. Jonathan didn't open the door right away. He asked the old man if he carried a weapon. In these hills, it wasn't a rude question, it was common sense. The old man said he did not. He lifted his hands where Jonathan could see them and said he was a man of the cloth, a preacher. I knew preachers sometimes went unarmed, but I also knew many had stopped doing that. Not because they wanted violence, but because these hills could be dangerous and not everyone took kindly to a preacher wandering through. Still, the old man's voice sounded tired, and there was something calm about him that made me feel, for just a moment, like the storm outside wasn't so close. Jonathan opened the door and kept the rifle in his hands as the preacher stepped inside. The man looked worn down by travel. He held his hat politely in front of him and thanked us again and again. When Jonathan finally lowered the rifle, he offered the preacher his hand. The preacher shook it, and I remember having a strange thought in that moment. It felt as though the room grew a little brighter, as if the fire decided to burn cleaner. The preacher introduced himself as Father Nathaniel. He said he was on his way to visit our priest in town. Jonathan set a chair for him by the fire, and the 2 of them sat down to speak. I warmed what food we had left and made coffee. The smell filled the room, mixing with wood smoke and damp wool. Father Nathaniel ate slowly, with the careful manners of someone who had been raised to never take more than he was given. He thanked me, too, and his eyes held mine when he spoke, as if he wanted me to believe that his gratitude was real. The men talked late into the night. I tried to listen while I cleaned and kept the kettle warm, but the cold always got into my back and made the pain worse. In winter, I tired early. Eventually, I excused myself and went to sleep. I could still hear their voices for a while, low and steady. At some point, I heard the quiet clink of a bottle. Jonathan had whiskey he saved for nights like that, when the cold felt personal. I never liked it, but I also learned that sometimes it was better to keep quiet and let him have his comforts. In the morning, I came out to find Jonathan asleep in his chair, his head leaned awkwardly against the wall. The fire had died down to embers. Father Nathaniel was gone. For a moment, I thought perhaps I had dreamed the whole thing, but then I saw a note on the table near the door. It was written neatly, like someone who had learned to write with care. It said, "I thank you for your hospitality. For that, I am in your debt. I did not say this last night, but I have kin here, too. She lives in a cabin near the Umbral Trail. If you ever need help, go there and give my name, and she will help you." My stomach tightened as I read those words. The Umbral Trail was not a place people spoke about easily. It cut through a part of the forest where the air always seemed wrong. Even in daylight, it felt like you were walking under a lid. People went there only if they had no other choice, and even then they hurried. When I was younger, I heard whispers that animals went silent there, that birds avoided it, that sometimes you would smell rot when there was no dead thing nearby. Jonathan had mentioned that trail more than once over the years. He spoke once about seeing an old woman there. He said she stood by an oak tree that looked older than the rest, watching the path without blinking, like a person waiting for something promised to them. He made it sound like he didn't believe his own eyes, but I noticed he avoided that trail afterward. When Jonathan woke and I showed him the note, his face changed in a way that made me uneasy. He read it once, then again, and then without a word, he threw it into the fire. The paper curled and blackened and vanished. I asked him why he did that. He didn't answer. He only cursed under his breath and told me to let it go. That wasn't like him, not exactly. Jonathan could be stubborn and rough, but he usually explained himself when he thought he had to. The fact that he wouldn't speak on it made the note feel heavier than it should have. The rest of winter passed as winter always does, slowly, one gray day after another. When spring finally came, it felt like a blessing. The dogs ran the land again, free and happy, and I returned to working the small farm patch near the house. Jonathan went out each day to check the grounds and inspect his traps. In those weeks, life settled back into something that almost felt safe. In that normal routine, there was peace. Then one day, Jonathan came back hurt. A wolf had attacked him while he was checking his traps. The wound on his right leg was deep, and his left hand was torn up enough that I could see how badly it could have gone. I tried to stop the bleeding the best I could, but I am not a healer. I did what I knew and what I had learned from other women, but it wasn't enough. Not really. Jonathan told me not to worry. He said he would go to the nearest neighbors, the Wills family, to get help, maybe even a ride into town if needed. He told me to stay home and watch the dogs. He tried to sound calm, like it was nothing, like I was the one making it worse by looking scared. He left at noon. I spent the day forcing myself to work, forcing myself to stay busy so my fear wouldn't swallow me. The bandages I had wrapped on him before he left were already stained through when he stepped out the door. He didn't return until night. When he did come back, he looked exhausted, but the wounds were properly cleaned and wrapped, better than anything I could have managed. I asked him what happened. He said that on the road he had come across a wagon passing through, and there was a woman healer traveling with it. He said she treated him and refused payment beyond a simple thank you. I wanted to believe him. I wanted to feel relieved. I thanked the Lord for sparing my husband's life. Jonathan did not join me in prayer. He went straight to bed and fell asleep like someone dropped into darkness. I should have known then that something was wrong. But relief can make you foolish. It can make you ignore the small details you would notice on any other day. After that, My own days stayed almost the same. Jonathan's days did not. He began leaving early in the morning without the dogs. That was unusual. Colt always followed him before, and Will stayed close behind. Jonathan liked having them with him, and the dogs liked it too. But suddenly he would step out alone, not even looking back when Colt whined at the door. He started returning late, dirty and tired, like he had been crawling through the forest instead of walking it. He would barely speak. Some nights he wouldn't speak at all. He would wash quickly, avoiding my eyes, and go straight to bed. When I tried to ask what was wrong, he brushed me off and said the work was harder than usual, that his injuries were slowing him down, that I should stop pestering him. The meat he brought home began to change. It wasn't fresh. Sometimes it smelled wrong as soon as he set it down, like it had been sitting too long in heat. Once when I cut into it, I realized it was already turning. I had to throw it away, even though we could not afford waste. Jonathan didn't react the way he should have. He didn't get angry, didn't apologize, didn't even seem to care. The dogs reacted, though. Colt grew nervous when Jonathan was home. It didn't make sense. Colt had always loved Jonathan, always ran to him, always wagged his tail so hard his whole body shook. Now I would see him pull back, his ears low, watching Jonathan like he wasn't sure who he was looking at. Will stayed closer to me and watched from behind my legs, her body tense. Sometimes she would growl softly, not loud enough for Jonathan to hear, but enough for me. One evening near sunset, I saw her. At the edge of our land near the trees stood an old woman beside an oak. She was still as a post, her figure half swallowed by shadow. I could not make out her face clearly, but I knew what I was seeing because Jonathan had described it. The same oak, the same posture, the same feeling in my chest like I had suddenly stepped into colder air. I told Jonathan about her the moment he came in. I expected him to grab the rifle, to ask questions, to go look. Instead, he stared at me with a look that made my mouth go dry. He told me to keep quiet and mind my words. I asked him why he spoke to me like that, and he didn't answer. But it felt, strangely, like he wasn't angry that she was there. It felt like he was angry that I had seen her. In the days that followed, I saw less and less of him. He stayed out longer. When he came home, he was filthy, sometimes with stains on his clothes that looked too dark to be mud. Once I saw blood on his sleeves. Another time his boots were wet with something that wasn't water. I asked him about it, and he ignored me. He told me to mind my chores. He told me to stay out of his affairs. That distance between us grew until the house felt like it held two strangers instead of a married couple. I kept telling myself it would pass, that he was stressed, that pain was making him cruel. But deep down, I knew it was more than that. He had stopped going into town for supplies. He had stopped talking about the future. He moved through the house like someone who didn't belong to it. I finally gathered my courage and decided I had to go to town myself. I hitched the cart, took the dogs, and left early. The journey was long, even in good weather. It should have been easier in summer, but the road felt strange that day. There were no other travelers, no wagons, no men heading out to work, no women walking with baskets. It was as if the world had quietly stepped away from that path and left me alone on it. Colt seemed happier the farther we got from the forest. He ran and played along the road like a pup again. Will kept close to me, always glancing back, her ears turning towards sounds I couldn't hear. It took the whole day to reach Wilter Spring. By the time I arrived, dusk had already started to settle. I went to the church and asked for a room for the night, as I had done once before in harsh weather. Father Elias and Sister Constance met with me. They looked tired, and they listened while I spoke. I told them about Jonathan's injury, his change in behavior, the old woman by the oak, the spoiled meat, the fear in the dogs. I poured it out like I had been holding my breath for weeks and finally found air. When I finished, there was a silence that felt too big. Sister Constance crossed herself and began to pray under her breath. Father Elias stood up and paced the small room. His hands clasped behind his back, he looked as if he wanted to speak, but feared the words. Finally, he said, child. I will not speak lightly about this. Jonathan may be under the influence of that witch. I felt my face flush with anger and confusion. What witch? You mean that old woman? She has not stepped onto my land. I have prayed over my home. How could she poison what is mine? Father Elias stopped pacing. He looked at me with a kind of pity I did not want. You may not have invited her, he said, but think of Jonathan's wounds. He may have lied about who helped him. I believe he went to her. He said she came through town once asking for directions. Someone pointed her toward that part of the forest, toward the Umbral Trail, and she left without another word. And after she took root there, things began to change. People, Father Elias said, were seeking her out for their troubles. Fewer came to church on Sunday. Those who did come looked distracted, like their thoughts were somewhere else. He said he had tried to warn them, but it was like preaching into the wind. Nothing, he said, changed their minds. He also said there were whispers of people disappearing on trails now, and the mayor blamed it on the local tribes. Father Elias didn't believe that. He believed something else was working in the woods, something that enjoyed having a scapegoat. He pressed something small into my hand, something meant to be a comfort, and told me to pray to keep myself safe from evil. Then the kindness stopped. They told me I could not stay at the chapel. They said I was tainted. They didn't say it with hatred, not exactly, but with fear strong enough to make them hard. I stood there stunned. The church was supposed to be my shelter. The Lord was my shepherd. And yet they treated me like an animal with sickness in its blood. I left with my throat tight and my hands shaking. I went to the local inn, hoping I could pay for a corner of a room. Anything. The inn was nearly empty. The barkeep looked at me like he recognized trouble in my face. He told me there were no rooms. I did not know what had happened to this town, how it could feel so closed and cold all at once. I slept outside near my cart with my dogs beside me. The night wasn't even cold, but I shivered until my teeth hurt. In the morning, I went to the general store. The storekeeper, Mr. Hartley, greeted me with forced warmth and offered me coffee when he heard I had slept outside. I traded what furs I had brought and handed him the short list of supplies I needed. I know I was given less than what I offered. I could see it in his eyes and the way he avoided meeting my gaze for too long, but I had no choice. Supplies were supplies, and I needed to get home. While he packed my goods, I asked him for news. Every time I asked a question, he glanced to his left, like he expected someone to be listening from the next aisle. He didn't tell me anything useful. He acted like any words about the forest might contaminate the air. And I felt something in that store that I hadn't felt there before. A heaviness that pressed down on my shoulders like a hand. Still, I left with what I could carry. Before I went, I bought a rifle. I told myself it was for wolves, for bears, for anything that might come near my land. But deep down, I think I bought it because I needed to feel like I had some power left in my life. The journey home felt longer. The sky seemed to dim earlier than it should have, even though it was still summer. The closer I got to our land, the darker everything felt, as if the light itself was being pushed away from those trees. By the time I reached the path that led to our house, it felt like evening had fallen too fast. I lit my lantern just to see where I was going. Colt and Will began to whine, not playful sounds, fearful ones. Their bodies pressed close to the cart, their heads low, their eyes fixed on the tree line. I looked toward the windows of my home, hoping to see a glow from inside, hoping Jonathan was there, hoping I would hear him moving around. The house was dark. As I stepped down from the cart, I heard a whisper say my name. It didn't come from one direction. It seemed to slide around me, touching my ears from every side at once. I turned fast, lifting the lantern, trying to find the source. I knew it was her. I knew it the way you know when a storm is coming, the way animals know before the first thunderclap. But I could not see her anywhere. I called out for Jonathan. There was no answer. I forced myself to walk into the house. The dogs ran in, too, and went straight to the fireplace, lying down close to it like they wanted the stone at their backs. They didn't relax. They lay with their heads up, staring at the door, watching it like they expected it to open on its own. I moved the supplies from the cart into the house as quickly as I could while keeping my eyes on the trees. The whispering followed me. Soft, constant, almost gentle. It wasn't shouting. It didn't need to. It sounded sure of itself, like something that waits because it knows time is on its side. When everything was inside, I shut the door and slid the bar into place. I checked the shutters and made sure they were closed tight. I kept hearing my name again and again until it felt like it was inside my skull. The house looked the same as when I left it. Silent, tired, like it had been holding its breath. I tried to prepare food, but the smell turned my stomach. I tried to drink water, and the moment it touched my tongue, I gagged. It tasted rotten, like something had spoiled deep in the barrel. I poured it out, and the stench rose up sharp, like decay. I gave up on eating. I lit the fire, sat down in Jonathan's chair, and rested the new rifle across my lap. I told myself I would not sleep, that I would keep watch. But exhaustion came down on me like a weight. At some point, my eyes closed. Morning brought the kind of pain that changes you. Colt and Will were still where they had been by the fireplace. They had not moved. At first, I thought they were sleeping too deeply. Then, I saw the stillness in them, the wrong kind of stillness. I touched Colt first, calling his name, and he did not respond. I touched Will. Nothing. They were dead. I fell apart. I cried over them like they were my own children. My grief was loud and ugly. I knelt on the floor and rocked and cursed the world. I cursed Jonathan for leaving. I cursed the old woman. I didn't say her name, but I cursed her all the same. My tears soaked my sleeves. My throat burned from wailing. Then I felt it, even through my grief. The light outside shifted, like something passed between the sun and the house. And I heard movement around the walls, slow steps circling, the faint creak of wood like someone leaning close, testing for weakness. I called for Jonathan again, my voice raw. No answer. I shouted toward the walls, warning whoever was out there that I had a rifle. The steps did not hurry. They did not retreat. They continued, patient and calm, like my warning meant nothing. I crawled up and forced myself to the nearest window. I peered through the narrow crack between the shutter and the frame. At first, I saw nothing but trees and shadow. Then the darkness outside seemed to thicken, like a fog that wasn't made of water. The creaking grew louder, wood complaining under a weight. A shadow moved into place and blocked my view completely. I couldn't see a face. I couldn't even see a clear shape. But I felt the presence on the other side of that window slit, immense and heavy, like standing too close to a great animal you cannot see. It felt like something staring back, something that knew exactly where I was. My hands tightened around the rifle until my fingers hurt. I cursed again, desperate and furious. Nothing changed. That presence simply waited. I backed away and began to pray. I called on the Lord to banish whatever abomination was stalking my home. I begged the Savior to give me strength, to help me endure. I prayed for peace for Colt and Will. Most of all, I prayed that Jonathan would return to me safe and whole, freed from whatever touch had taken him. No answer came. The pressure in the air remained. It pressed down on my chest until breathing felt like work. My legs gave out and I fell to my knees, still praying, still trying, still bargaining with heaven like heaven might suddenly remember me. That is when the whisper spoke clearly, not from the forest this time, but from everywhere at once, inside and outside, soft as breath against skin. There is no God here, child. This land is mine and all who live here are mine. Open the door and come to me. I screamed toward the door. I shouted prayers in reply, the words tumbling out of me with panic and fury. I recited anything I could remember, anything that might fill the house with something holy. Nothing happened. No light filled the room, no warmth returned, no peace came. I collapsed onto my side, empty, shaking, feeling like I had reached the end of my own strength and found nothing waiting there except darkness. It has been 4 days now since then. I do not know if time is moving properly. Sometimes the hours pass in a blink. Sometimes a single hour feels like an entire night. The candle is low. The air in this house feels thick, like it has been breathed too many times. The silence outside is wrong. Even the birds have gone quiet. Something is happening to my mind. I can feel it, like sadness digging deeper and deeper, turning into something heavier than sadness. I try to stand and my legs feel weak. I try to eat and my stomach turns. I try to pray and the words feel distant, like they belong to someone else. And she keeps calling. Sometimes it is my name, soft and sweet. Sometimes it sounds like Jonathan's voice, and that is the cruelest trick of all. Because for a moment my heart lifts before I remember. Sometimes it is only the trees groaning and creaking as if they are talking to each other. I do not know where my husband is. I do not know if he is alive. I do not know if he is walking those trails willingly, or if he has been taken the way my dogs were taken, quietly, without a struggle anyone could hear. I do know he has not come back to this house, not even once, not even to look me in the eye. If you have found this letter, then you have come close enough to this place for her to notice you. I am sorry for that. I would warn you to leave, to turn around, to never speak her name, to never follow a voice into the trees, to never believe that you are alone out here, even in full daylight. But I do not know if you can leave once you are seen. The candle is dying. My hands are shaking as I write this. The water is spoiled, the food is spoiled, and the air itself feels spoiled. I feel her in the silence between my breaths. I feel her patience. I feel her certainty. If I stop writing, it is because she has finally made me open the door. I hope you find this before nightfall, and I hope you are wiser than I was. I hope you run. I hope you do not hear your own name whispered back to you from the trees. Story 2. I work on the 6th floor of a building with mirrored windows that make the sky look dirtier than it really is. From the street, the place looks expensive and important. It is all glass, sharp lines, and polished stone. Inside, it is mostly cheap coffee, tired faces, and people pretending they are not afraid of being replaced. I am a junior analyst there. I consider myself ambitious, but not in a loud way. Quietly ambitious, I suppose. The embarrassing kind of ambitious people are when they still believe that doing good work is enough. I stay late. I answer emails too quickly. I volunteer for tasks nobody else wants because some part of me still thinks someone above me will notice and remember. What I learned instead is that people do notice usefulness. Not talent, not loyalty. Usefulness. People can smell it from 3 cubicles away. Once they know you are useful, they begin to test how much they can take from you before you resist. I do not say that bitterly, though maybe I should. That is just how offices work. Everyone likes a useful person. Maybe that is why everyone likes Rafiq. Rafiq is our senior manager. He has the sort of calm presence people trust without thinking too hard about why. He wears pale shirts with the sleeves rolled exactly twice, never once, never 3 times. His hair is always neat, but never stiff. His voice is soft enough to make you lean in slightly, which makes you feel like whatever he says is private and important. He remembers things. Your coffee order. Your mother's surgery. The project you stayed late on last month. The name of your old manager, the one you hated but never said out loud you hated. He remembers who is insecure, who is ambitious, who is desperate to be liked, and who needs protecting at exactly the right moment. That is what made him dangerous, though I did not understand that then. To me, he was just good. The kind of person who could enter a tense meeting and make everyone feel silly for being tense. The kind of person who laughed lightly at pressure but never carelessly. The kind of man who made you think he was above all the little ugliness of the office. I learned that firsthand 6 months ago. I had made a mistake in a client model. It was not catastrophic, but it was close enough. A number had been carried through incorrectly, and the final output made a forecast look cleaner than it should have been. The error was mine, I can admit that. I had been rushing. I had worked too late for too many nights and checked what I wanted to be right instead of what was actually there. A director named Farhana decided it was not carelessness. She called it dishonesty. The meeting where she said it was small, which somehow made it worse. Large meetings let you disappear into the room. Small meetings give you nowhere to hide. There were only 5 of us around the table, and every breath felt too loud. Farhana sat across from me with her laptop open and her expression cold. "This is not just an error," she said. "This changes the story of the model." I tried to explain I heard my own voice shaking and hated it. It was an input issue. I missed it in the final check. She looked at me like I had insulted her. That is one explanation. The room went quiet. Everyone knew what she meant. I felt heat rise into my face. My career was not much, but it was all I had. I had worked hard to get there. I had built my life carefully, one small sacrifice at a time. And in that moment, I could feel it all leaning over the edge because of one bad cell in one bad spreadsheet. Rafiq was in the room because his team had briefly touched the project. He did not have to say anything. The mistake was not his. He could have let Farhana cut me apart and nobody would have blamed him. But he leaned back in his chair, crossed one ankle over the other, and said, "No, that's not what happened." Not loudly, not aggressively, just with enough certainty that everyone turned toward him. He walked them through the timeline, calmly. Dates, email timestamps, version history. He pointed out where I had made the mistake, but he framed it as carelessness under deadline pressure, not dishonesty. He criticized me just enough to sound objective, not enough to let anyone call me malicious. He saved me. I do not mean that dramatically. He saved my job, or at least saved my reputation, in a place where reputation becomes fact if enough people repeat it. After the meeting, I stood in the lift lobby feeling hollow, my shirt stuck to my back with sweat. The doors reflected my face back at me, pale and drained. Rafiq came up beside me and handed me a paper cup of coffee. Americano. No sugar. "My order. Careful next time," he said. "I will." He never mentioned it again. That was part of why I trusted him. A man who does something kind and never asks to be thanked feels safer than a man who keeps reminding you that you owe him. I did not understand then that some debts are stronger when they are never spoken. The Tuesday he asked me for the favor, it was raining hard enough that the windows looked like they were melting. The whole city had gone gray. Water ran down the glass in twisting sheets, turning the view into something blurred and ugly. Inside the office, the carpet smelled damp near the entrance, and everyone was in that low-energy mood that comes with bad weather and too much work. Rafiq appeared at my desk at 4:12. I remember the time because I had been waiting for a file to load and staring at the corner of my screen when he arrived. "Walk with me for a second," he said. I followed him without thinking. He led me to the narrow corridor near the stairwell where people went to take personal calls or whisper after bad meetings. It smelled of damp carpet and old paint. The lights there always seemed slightly dimmer than everywhere else. He put one hand in his pocket and looked down the corridor as if checking we were alone. "I need to ask something slightly awkward," he said. "Okay." He rubbed the back of his neck. It looked like nervousness. Only later did I realize it was not. His breathing did not change. There was no sweat at his hairline. His eyes were steady. He was not waiting for my answer the way anxious people wait. He was waiting the way a man waits when he already knows what you are going to say, like someone who had done the math on me long before he walked to my desk. "Thursday evening," he said. "If anyone asks, tell them we had dinner after work." I stared at him. He gave a small, embarrassed smile. "Chill. It's nothing dramatic. Just a sensitive personal matter." I had worked in that office for over 2 years, so I understood what he was suggesting. Affair. That was where my mind went immediately. It disappointed me, but it did not horrify me. Affairs are the kind of small moral stains the world runs on. People lie to spouses, cover for friends, delete messages, create excuses. They still bring pastries to meetings. They still remember your coffee order. What time, I asked? 7:30. Dinner nearby. I dropped you home after. He named a restaurant 2 blocks away. We had both been there before with teams after long workdays. It was believable. Familiar enough to sound natural, vague enough not to need too many details. I nodded. I knew you'd agree, my good man, he said. My good man, he said it warmly, lightly, the way he said many things. I remember feeling pleased. That is the part I hate most. Not afraid, not suspicious. Pleased, like being trusted with his secret meant I had been chosen. Weeks passed. No wife called. No angry woman appeared at reception. No scandal broke open near the lift. Rafiq remained Rafiq, defending juniors in budget meetings, bringing pastries on Fridays, saying good work when he passed my desk, asking after people's parents and remembering who was fasting, who was traveling, who had a sick child. The lie dissolved into the background. I forgot it the way you forget a small debt once you think it has been paid. Then Detective Hassan came to our office last week. He wore a navy shirt and dark trousers. His shoes were recently polished, but had walked through rain. He looked tired in that administrative way of men who spend their days asking questions nobody wants to answer. Not dramatic. Not movie detective tired. Just worn down by paperwork, waiting rooms, polite refusals, and people who tell the truth only when it costs them nothing. There were 4 of us in the small conference room. Detective Hassan, the HR business partner. Rafiq, me. The conference room smelled faintly of marker ink and stale air. A glass wall looked out over the main floor, but the blinds were half closed. Through the gaps, I could see people pretending not to look at us. The detective thanked us for our time. He said he was reconstructing the movements of a missing woman, last seen Thursday evening, near our building. Then he placed a printed photograph on the table. The woman in the picture was young. Dark hair, round face, clear skin, a small mole beside her left eyebrow. She was smiling in a way that looked natural, as if someone had said something just before pressing the button. It is strange how quickly a face can become permanent in your mind. Before that moment, she was no one to me. After it, I could not stop seeing her. Did either of you see her? The detective asked. No, I said. That was the truth. Rafiq looked at the photograph for a moment, then slowly shook his head. I'm sorry, he said. I have never seen this person. That I'm sorry landed, strangely. You do not apologize for not recognizing a stranger. Not usually. It sounded rehearsed, but maybe I only think that now because of everything that happened after. Mr. Rafiq, Detective Hassan said, checking his notes. We understand you were in the area that evening. He gave the date. The date entered the room like cold air. My body remembered before my mind did. Thursday, 7:30. Dinner nearby, he dropped me home after. Rafiq turned slightly toward me. Not enough for the detective to notice. Or maybe enough and the detective noticed everything. I still do not know. Rafiq did not plead with his eyes. He did not warn me. He did not look afraid. He waited, the same patient stillness from the stairwell. Yes, Rafiq said. I had a late dinner nearby. With him. The detective turned to me, and there it was. The lie. Already built. It had walls, a roof, furniture. I had stepped inside it once before without much thought. Now I stood at its door again, and muscle memory did the rest. Yes, I said. The HR woman looked relieved, which made me feel worse for reasons I could not explain. The detective asked for details. I gave them. 7:30, the restaurant, dinner. He dropped me home around 9. I heard myself speak calmly, too calmly. The lie came easier the second time. That should have frightened me, but in the moment I was mostly aware of Rafiq sitting beside me, warm and solid and familiar, like the world had not changed. Thank you, Detective Hassan said. That's helpful. Helpful. That word has lived inside me ever since. Afterward, in the corridor, Rafiq caught my eye. He held my gaze for exactly 1 second longer than relief would require. Not threatening, not grateful. Measuring, That is the only word for it. Measuring me like a man confirming that an investment had performed exactly as expected. Then he nodded and walked away. 2 days later, a coffee appeared on my desk. Americano. No sugar. No note. None was needed. Later that afternoon, the HR business partner sent an email to the floor. It was one of those soft, distressed corporate messages people write when something bad has touched the workplace, but nobody knows how close it is allowed to come. She wrote about how awful the situation was, how she hoped it would be resolved soon, how she trusted everyone was doing okay, how people could reach out if they needed support. I skimmed it the way you skim those emails, lazily, with just enough attention to not miss anything important. One sentence made me chuckle at first. Let us all pray and hope that the detective does not return to our premises again. It was such an oddly specific thing to say in an HR email. She had clearly been more spooked by Detective Hassan than she wanted to admit. Something about that amused me in a tired, cruel way. 12 people replied with varying amounts of corporate sympathy. So sorry to hear this. Praying for her safe return. Thank you for keeping us informed. Let's support each other during this difficult time. By then I decided there had been enough bootlicking for the day, so I did not reply. Rafik did. At 4:12. Just 2 words. He will. Nobody asked what he meant. I think nobody wanted to. 2 days ago, I had to access the shared drive before a client meeting. I had a legitimate reason to be in his files. That is important, though I know it does not save me. Rafik had forwarded me a folder link and messaged, "Pull the Q3 deck. I'll be 5 minutes late." The folder opened. I started looking for the deck. It was not where I expected it to be, so I browsed through the directory. There were project folders, old versions, client subfolders, financial models, presentation drafts. All ordinary, all boring. Then I saw another folder nested between 2 project folders. No label, just a date range. I should have closed it. I know that I should have told myself it was none of my business and found the Q3 deck. I should have remembered that opening unmarked folders in a senior manager's drive was not only unprofessional, but I did not close it. I clicked. The folder opened to photographs. Dozens of them. Women, different ages, different faces, different places. A street corner, a restaurant window, a parking lot at dusk. A woman standing at an ATM. Another waiting near a bus stop. Another unlocking the gate to an apartment building. None of them were looking at the camera. That was what made the photos feel wrong immediately. They were not social pictures, not event photos, not work-related. The women were unaware. The angles were low, patient and precise, too carefully framed to be accidental, too distant to be intimate, too close to be harmless. These were not memories. They were records. My mouth went dry. I clicked through them without meaning to. My finger kept moving on the trackpad even as my stomach turned. Each photo felt like walking farther into a room I had no right to enter and no easy way to leave. I did not recognize any of the women. Until I did. Round face. Clear skin. Dark hair. A small mole beside her left eyebrow. The missing woman. There were several photographs of her. One outside a shop. One crossing near the corner of our building. One through what looked like a car window, her face turned slightly away. One where she stood under an awning while rain blurred the background. I closed the folder. Then I closed the laptop. I sat at my desk for what felt like a long time, looking at my hands. They looked normal. That bothered me. Hands should change after you touch something like that. They should darken or shake or show some sign of what they have done. Mine just lay there on the desk, useless and familiar. Then I heard Rafik's voice in the corridor. He was slightly out of breath and mid-laugh at something someone had said. A normal laugh. Warm. Effortless. I opened a spreadsheet and stared at it until he walked past. "Did you find it, good man?" he called over. "Yes," I said. "I knew you would." He kept walking. I did not know if he meant the deck. I still do not know he did not know exactly what I had found. Or maybe he did, and he still was not afraid. I cannot decide which is worse. The following evening, I was in the parking lot when Detective Hassan called. His number appeared on my phone, and for a second, I could not move. Through the windshield, the office building glowed in neat rows. The sixth floor was still lit. Somewhere up there, Rafik was probably at his desk, answering emails, reviewing slides, remembering someone's coffee order. I answered. Detective Hassan's voice was calm. A few follow-up questions. Routine. Nothing to worry about. Nothing to worry about. People only say that when there is already something to worry about. He told me they had checked the restaurant. The staff remembered Rafik that Thursday evening at 7:30, having dinner with a man who matched my description. Rafik was apparently a regular customer, so everyone remembered him clearly. My account was consistent. That's all we needed, Detective Hassan said. Thank you for your time. I said something. I do not remember what. The call ended. I sat there with the phone in my lap, waiting to feel relieved. The feeling never came. Instead, the restaurant confirmation made everything worse. I know that sounds strange. It should have helped me. It made me clean, at least in the eyes of the police. My lie had been supported by outside evidence. I was no longer the weak point in Rafik's story. But the neatness of it made my skin crawl. The staff remembered him too clearly. The man who matched my description sat there like a place had been set for a ghost of me before I ever agreed to become one. It was all too clean, too ready. As if someone at that restaurant had also been waiting to be asked. My phone vibrated again. I looked down, Rafik calling. I did not answer. The ringing stopped. Then it started again. Rafik calling, I let it ring. A third call came. I turned the phone face down on the passenger seat. I sat in the parking lot with both hands on the steering wheel and tried to work out why I felt worse instead of safer. Maybe because now the lie was no longer just something I had said, it had structure. It had roots. Maybe because if I changed my story now, I would not simply be correcting a misunderstanding. I would be destroying a carefully built alibi that had already wrapped itself around me. I thought about the woman in the photograph, the mole beside her left eyebrow, her smile, the folder, the date range, the dozens of women, none of them looking at the camera. Then the choices arranged themselves in my mind with the clean cruelty of a spreadsheet. Confirm the alibi, and it becomes permanent. No longer muscle memory. No longer a favor done before I knew better. A deliberate choice. A lie made with full knowledge of the folder and every face inside it. Retract it, and I become the man who gave a false alibi in a missing persons case. The man who waited. The man who accessed a colleague's files and said nothing. The man who lied once because he was useful, and again because he was afraid. The parking barrier lifted in front of me. I had two options. Left toward the main road, toward the police station. Right toward home, the car behind me tapped its horn once. Just once. A small, impatient sound. I turned right. I have started timing how long I can go without thinking about her face. The record is 9 minutes. I said it this morning on the drive to work. I do not think I will beat it today. Rafik has not mentioned the calls. That is what frightens me now. Not that he is angry, not that he is suspicious, but that he is exactly the same. He passes my desk with the same lightness. He asks whether I have eaten. He smiles at jokes and meetings. He says, "Good work," in that calm voice that used to make me feel seen. Today, he left a coffee on my desk again. Americano. No sugar. This time there was a note. Only one line. Careful next time. I stared at it until the letters stopped looking like words. I do not know if he hurt her. I do not know if she is alive. I do not know what those photographs mean, or how many folders there are, or how far the date range goes back. I do not know whether the restaurant was part of it, or just another piece that somehow fit too well. I do not know whether Rafik is a murderer, a stalker, or Something quieter and uglier that has not fully shown itself yet. What I know is that I turned right. And I know what turning right means. I am writing this because I need someone else to understand the shape of the trap, even if it is one I walked into myself. I know what people will say. Go to the police. Tell them everything. Show them the folder. Tell them you lied. Tell them about the coffee. Tell them about the note. I know. I already know. Tell me something I can do something with. Tell me how to walk into that station and explain why I lied twice. Tell me how to explain that I waited after seeing the photographs. Tell me how to admit I opened a folder I was not meant to open and then sat on the information because I was afraid of what it would do to my life. Tell me how to say that when the road gave me a choice, I turned right. Tell me how to do all of that without destroying the only life I have carefully built. Tell me. I will wait. That is what I am good at, after all. Waiting. Being useful. Being quiet. Story 3. I have been very lucky to grow up where I did. At least, that is what I used to tell myself. I grew up in a lake community, in a house that sat right on the water. That sounds beautiful, and most of the time it was. The sunrises were unreal. The sunsets looked like someone had spilled gold across the surface of the lake. In the summer, the water turned bright and sparkling, and in the winter, when the ice was thick enough, the whole place became a frozen field that stretched out past the docks. It was not like a normal neighborhood. Most of the people around us were older. Retired couples, widows, fishermen, people who had bought lake houses decades earlier and never left. When I was little, I rarely saw kids my own age unless it was summer. That was when parents from the city would send their children to stay with grandparents for a week or two. And suddenly the lake would be full of kids again. We would go tubing behind boats until our arms hurt. We would have water gunfights near the docks. We would swim for hours and pretend to be mermaids, arguing over whose imaginary tale was prettier or whose underwater kingdom was stronger. I loved those days, but summer always ended. The grandkids went home, the lake grew quiet, the older neighbors went back to their routines. And for the other 3 seasons of the year, I was lonely more often than I admitted. Still, I tried to focus on the good parts. We had a private dock. We had a boat. We had a view most people would pay a fortune to wake up to. In high school, my house became the place people wanted to hang out because everyone wanted to be near the lake. That helped me get in with some of the cool kids, or at least close enough to feel included. I could swim whenever I wanted. In winter, I could ice skate. That freedom felt amazing. But the lake had always had a nasty side. When there was no ice, the biggest problem was swimmer's itch. I am not going to name the lake, partly because I do not want anyone local to recognize it, and partly because I know there are always people online who think warnings are invitations. Some daredevil would show up trying to prove me wrong, and I do not want that on my conscience. Just know that our lake had unusually bad swimmer's itch. Aggressive swimmer's itch, if that makes sense. I know it sounds ridiculous to call a parasite aggressive, but anyone who grew up around that water would understand. It was not like the mild rash you hear about from other lakes. This stuff felt personal. One summer when I was maybe 10 or 11, I had a water gun fight with a few of the neighbors' grandkids near our dock. We were in the water for less than an hour. No more than 15 minutes after getting out, my skin felt like it was on fire. Welts rose all over my arms, legs, stomach, and back. It looked like something had tried to hatch out of me. The other kids got it too. One girl scratched so hard that her skin opened in strips. Her parents had to take her to the hospital because she would not stop. Blood clumped under her fingernails while she cried and kept scratching, like the itch had gotten into her brain and taken over. After that, I learned to towel off immediately. Shower, if possible. Never sit around wet. A couple blocks from my house, there was also a public beach. All summer long, signs were posted near the parking lot and along the sand. Warning, swimmer's itch. Below that, in smaller letters, were instructions to shower or towel dry immediately after leaving the water. The swimmer's itch was usually worst at the beginning of the summer. The city would eventually treat the lake with chemicals to kill the parasite and some of the lake weeds it lived on. And after that, the issue became manageable. That was the old problem, the normal problem. Then the muskrats came. I know that might sound funny at first. Most people hear the word and picture some harmless, wet little rodent. A beaver crossed with a mouse, maybe, or a hamster that learned how to swim. Search them online and you will probably see facts about wetlands and plants and burrows. You will read that they are shy or solitary or not normally dangerous unless cornered. I am telling you now, whatever lives in our lake is not normal. And despite what anyone says, muskrats can be mean. Ours were worse than mean. They were organized. When I was growing up, I never saw a single muskrat. Not once. We had seagulls, we had fish, we had turtles. We eventually got ducks, though even that happened slowly over several years. At first, there were only a few ducks near the beach. Then more came each season until they became a regular part of the lake. The muskrats were not like that. They appeared all at once. A little over a year ago, 10 of them were spotted near the public dock by the beach. They sat along the shoreline in a row watching people fish. That made the local newspaper, not because muskrats themselves were strange, but because the people who saw them kept describing how they looked at everyone. One fisherman was quoted in the article. I still remember it because people laughed about it for weeks. He said, "It didn't feel like when geese or ducks watch us. Those birds do it because they're cautious or curious or protecting babies. These things were different. I know I sound like someone who should be thrown in a loony bin, but I swear to the Lord above, they were glaring. I have never felt such hate from an animal." At the time, everyone thought that was funny. We stopped laughing pretty quickly. Within 2 months, the lake had at least 100 confirmed muskrats. People saw them everywhere. Perched on boat lifts, swimming near fishing bobbers. Sitting under docks, one man posted a picture of his cat chasing one across the lawn, though in the next post he admitted the cat came back bleeding from its face and refused to go outside for days. At first, city officials treated it like an odd wildlife issue. Then the ducks started dying. It began with a Facebook post on the city page. Residents used that page to complain about trash pickup, roadwork, fireworks, lost dogs, and everything else. One morning, a woman uploaded a video from the beach. In the video, a mallard duck floated close to shore. A small muskrat, smaller than any adult one I had seen, swam toward it. The duck noticed too late. The muskrat lunged and latched onto its throat. The duck thrashed wildly, beating its wings against the water and twisting its neck, trying to shake the thing off. Its panicked quacks quickly became wet and garbled. Blood spread in the water around it. The muskrat hooked its little claws close to the duck's shoulders and held on. Then the duck went limp. The muskrat dragged the whole carcass underwater. People argued in the comments. Some said nature was brutal and we should mind our business. Some said muskrats sometimes eat small birds. Some said the video was fake. But what bothered me was the size difference. That muskrat looked like a baby. It should not have been strong enough to pull an adult duck under against the duck's natural buoyancy, but it did. After that, things got worse fast. People started finding duck parts in their yards, feet on docks, wings near boat lifts, heads floating near shore. Sometimes the muskrats did not even eat the ducks. Multiple people posted about seeing them swim toward the beach, dragging mangled ducks behind them, only to let the bodies go and watch them drift into the shallows where families were trying to enjoy the day. It was like they wanted us to see. The remaining ducks stopped going into the water. At first, they stayed on shore. Then they wandered along sidewalks. Then they flew farther into town, landing in parking lots and yards far from the lake. I remember seeing a pair of mallards standing outside the grocery store one afternoon, looking confused and terrified, like refugees. Soon, there were no ducks left on the lake. Then the loons disappeared. Then most of the seagulls. A lake that had once been alive with birds became strangely empty. The only things floating on the surface were people and muskrats. The first time I saw how dangerous they really were, I was on the boat with my parents. It was a clear day, sunny and warm, the kind of day that made the lake look innocent again. My dad was driving slowly along the shoreline while my mom and I sat up front, letting the cool spray hit our faces. We stopped near the public beach to people watch because that is apparently what Midwestern lake people do when they have no better plans. The beach was busy, kids splashed in the shallows, parents sat under umbrellas, teenagers tossed a football in the water, a few boats drifted nearby. Then my mom gasped, "Oh my gosh, look, the bald eagle." My dad groaned from the wheel, "Honey, we see the eagles every day. It's nothing new." "Oh, I think it's going for a fish." I looked up and saw the eagle circling. It was beautiful. Huge wings spread wide, white head bright against the sky. It turned once, then again, watching the water below. Then I looked down. A muskrat floated on the surface. It was half submerged, only its head and back showing. Its black eyes were tilted upward toward the eagle. It looked like it was waiting. Then it began swimming toward the spot where the eagle was circling. Another muskrat surfaced. Then another. Then another. I sat up slowly, feeling a cold dread move through me despite the heat of the sun. I counted 10, then 15, then more. Near and far from our boat, muskrats were all swimming toward the same patch of water. 30 at least, maybe more. All silent, all moving together. The eagle folded its wings and dove. The muskrats vanished beneath the surface at the exact same time. A scream rose in my throat before I could stop it. "No!" My parents turned toward me, confused. Then the eagle hit the water. Its talons broke the surface where it must have seen a fish. 2 muskrats erupted from underneath and latched onto its feet. The eagle jerked in confusion, wings flaring wide. For one awful second, it looked almost offended, like it could not understand how anything beneath it had dared to grab back. Then the muskrats pulled down. The eagle sank lower. Water splashed around its body. Then more muskrats burst from the lake. They launched themselves in arcs, like dolphins. They struck the eagle from every side. A swarm of wet brown bodies closed around the bird of prey, dragging it down in what looked like some twisted baptism. The eagle screamed. I had never heard an eagle scream like that before. It was high, sharp, and full of panic. Its wings beat the water, sending spray into the air. Feathers tore loose. Chunks of flesh flashed red between the moving bodies. The eagle's head would break the surface long enough to scream, then vanish again as the muskrats forced it under. The sound the muskrats made was worse. They did not growl, they did not snarl, they hummed. All of them together, a soft, pleasant hum rose from the swarm as they tore the eagle apart. It sounded almost melodic, like a choir warming up before a hymn. My dad stood from the driver's seat. Holy Mother of God. My mom dropped her phone onto the boat floor. She turned away, kneeling down with both hands over her face. "Oh my God," she kept saying. "I can't watch. I can't watch." The attack happened in flashes in my memory. Brown bodies, white feathers, red water, the eagle's wings thrashing, then weakening, then disappearing beneath the swarm. When it was over, what remained barely looked like a bird. The feet were still attached to a torn stomach area. Above that, where the lungs and heart should have been, the body had been picked clean down to the spine. The bones looked white, almost bleached. The wings were gone entirely. The head remained mostly intact, hanging loose from strips of muscle. Then the muskrats all bit into the carcass and pulled it under. The lake swallowed the eagle. Only then did I hear the beach. People were screaming. Parents dragged children out of the water. Kids cried. Someone slipped in the shallows and had to be pulled up by 2 strangers. A man yelled for everyone to get out. Towels, sandals, and toys were left behind in the rush. "We are leaving," my dad snapped. "Mary, Lauren, sit down or grab something." I sat frozen as we sped away. They were like piranhas, No, worse. Piranhas are just animals. What I had seen felt intentional, personal. Against nature itself, muskrats are supposed to be solitary. These things worked together. After the eagle, the town changed. Posts on the city page became constant. A video of 3 muskrats attacking a dog that had gone into the water to cool off. The owner beat them away with a boat paddle, but the dog needed stitches and never walked normally again. Photos of deep bites and claw marks on people's ankles and hands. A trail cam from the woods near the lake showed a deer being swarmed by what looked like hundreds of muskrats, maybe thousands. They poured over the ground like a living carpet, humming that same awful melody. The deer collapsed under their weight, almost folding in on itself before they dragged it out of frame. The deer never stopped screaming. Then a 7-year-old girl was killed at the beach. Out of respect, I will not say her name. I will not describe the details. I will only say it happened on a busy day in front of too many people, and from what I have heard, it was fast. Very fast. That was when the city finally closed the beach. For a while, there were meetings. Officials argued. Wildlife people came out. Signs were posted. The news covered it briefly, then moved on when there was nothing new enough to hold attention. The problem was that muskrats were protected in our area. You could not just kill them out of season or start shooting them near houses and public spaces. There were permits, regulations, fines, possible charges. People were furious. Traps were eventually allowed when muskrats started coming onto land, approaching doors, killing outdoor pets, and lunging at people walking to their cars. But the traps barely worked. They caught chipmunks, squirrels, sometimes nothing at all. The muskrats avoided them. They learned, or maybe they already knew. I stopped going into the lake. Everyone did. It became common to wear rubber boots or thick leather boots outside, even in summer, because the muskrats started attacking ankles. Grocery store workers had to sweep them away from automatic doors with brooms. A cashier at the local market got bitten when one hid beneath a display of watermelons. The lake community I loved became afraid of its own shoreline. The beach sat empty. The docks rotted quietly. Boats stayed covered. The water that used to hold children on floaties and teenagers on tubes became a dark, watchful thing. Winter did not help. We thought it might. We were wrong. Ice fishermen started reporting attacks through the fishing holes. Muskrats would launch themselves out of the openings and go for faces, hands, throats. One man lost part of his ear. Another needed stitches along his cheek. Someone's grandfather nearly lost an eye. Ice skaters were not safe either. Neither were the idiots who tried polar plunges. Nobody laughed about the muskrats anymore. I do not know if there are still fish in the lake. Maybe the muskrats ate them. Maybe the city chemicals changed something. Maybe whatever brought the muskrats here came from deeper down and took everything else first. I cannot tell you. I am too scared to go out on the dock. That is the part that hurts the most. Our dock was my favorite place in the world. I sat there with friends. I jumped from it as a kid. I cried there after breakups. I watched sunrises there when I could not sleep. I knew every board, every nail, every splintered edge. I have stepped on that dock thousands of times. Now I may never set foot on it again. The city is reopening the beach this summer. They say it is safe enough. They say the risk is manageable. They say people need recreation, tourism, normal life. They are putting up a new sign not because they believe it will protect anyone. Because if someone dies, it makes it harder for the city to be sued. That is what my dad says anyway. I saw the sign yesterday when we drove past the beach. It is large, bright, and impossible to miss. Warning, beware of muse rats. Underneath, in smaller text, are instructions about keeping distance, avoiding feeding wildlife, reporting aggressive animals, and leaving the water if muskrats are seen nearby. It looks official. It looks almost silly. If you did not know, you might take a picture of it and laugh. You might think, muskrats? Really? You might hear humming from the water and think it is insects or wind. or somebody's music from a boat farther out, you might see a few little brown heads floating near the buoys and think they are cute. You might let your dog splash in the shallows. You might let your child swim out just a little too far. So here is my warning. If you go to a beach this summer and see a sign that says, "Beware of muskrats," do not laugh. Do not take a picture. Do not assume small animals cannot hurt you. Leave. Because on my lake, the muskrats do not act like animals anymore. They watch, they wait, they hum. And when they move together, the water itself seems to obey them. It was the first long weekend in May, and Amy and I had decided we were going to start the summer with a camping trip. That was how we talked about it, at least, the beginning of summer. The first adventure, the trip that would set the mood for all the other trips we hoped to take once the weather warmed up properly. We had spent the last few months talking about hiking, fishing, canoeing, and sleeping under the stars, as if saying it often enough could pull the season closer. The destination made this trip feel special. We were going to load the boat, cross the lake from camp, and search for the first cabin my great-grandparents had ever built in the area. My family had talked about it for years, but no one had been there in a long time. The place was supposed to be nothing now, just old foundation ruins hidden somewhere up the hill across the water. If we were going to find it, we had to go early in the year before the undergrowth filled in and the tree canopy became too thick to see anything from the lake. That was the plan. The weather was not on our side that Saturday morning. The sky was partly covered with gray clouds, and the forecast said the high would only reach about 50 degrees for the next couple of days. That meant cold hands, damp clothes, and a lot of effort for something that might not even still be there. But Amy was excited. Amy's enthusiasm was the kind that made everything feel possible, even when my own nerves started whispering reasons to stay home. She stood near the boat wearing layers, a beanie and that wide grin of hers, posing for pictures like she was modeling outdoor gear instead of getting ready to be cold and miserable for 48 hours. "Admit it," she teased, turning sideways and awkwardly twerking on the edge of the boat. "You love your Instacamper, Mama, don't you?" I laughed, despite myself. I really do. It was true. I had always carried a little pre-trip anxiety with me. I checked gear 3 times. I worried about weather. I thought about what could go wrong. Amy had a way of balancing that out. She didn't ignore danger, but she refused to let it steal the joy before anything had even happened. We shoved off and began moving upstream. The boat cut through the cold water, leaving a thin wake behind us. The lake was calm in some spots and rippled in others where the wind touched it. The trees along the shoreline were still sparse from winter, their branches mostly bare with only hints of green beginning to show. That was exactly why we had come when we did. As we traveled, the old landmarks began to appear one by one. The cabin had supposedly been built across the lake from another old property, a place a few miles from our main camp. When we got close to that location, I slowed the boat and scanned the opposite hillside. For a while, everything looked the same: rocks, trees, brush, and shadows. Then I saw it, a subtle dip in the treetops. It would have meant nothing to anyone else, but I recognized it from old descriptions and family stories. The line of the trees broke in a way that suggested something had once been cleared there. I pointed it out to Amy. "What do you think?" She followed my finger, narrowed her eyes, then smiled. "That has to be it." I couldn't help smiling too. The change in her was immediate. The joking disappeared, and the focused version of Amy took over. She pulled out her compass, took a quick reading, checked our current position, then lined it up with the dip in the trees and a possible landing point on the opposite shore. In moments, she was all business. We beached the boat, secured it, and helped each other shoulder our packs. The weight of mine hit me harder than I expected. I staggered slightly, adjusting the straps. Amy noticed. "We can switch," she offered, giving me a concerned look. I straightened as if I was not already regretting half the gear I had packed. "Lead on, Mama." She rolled her eyes but smiled. The hill looked manageable from the opposite shore. It was not. It was steeper than it appeared and much higher than I had guessed. The dead leaves from the previous fall were slick under our boots. The ground was soft in places and rocky in others. Brush caught at our pants. Fallen branches snapped underfoot. Every time I thought the slope was about to level out, it rose again. Still, there were no obstacles large enough to force us off course. No deep ravines, no walls of brush, no huge blowdowns blocking the way. We kept climbing steadily, stopping only when one of us needed to adjust a strap or catch a breath. After about 200 yards, I heard Amy shout from ahead, "Look!" Her voice was bright with victory. I pushed myself up the last part of the ridge and found her pointing at something half hidden under dead grass and brush. At first, it only looked like a few dark shapes in the ground. Then I saw the corner. Old wooden pilings, roughly hewn and weathered nearly black, formed part of what had once been the cabin's foundation. They were sunk into the earth at odd angles, partly covered by moss, leaves, and thyme. But they were there. We had found it. "Well done," I said, smiling as we lowered our packs. Amy looked proud enough to float. We took a break for water, sitting near the remains of the foundation and looking around the place where my great-grandparents had started their life here. There was something strange about it, standing in a place that belonged to your family but had almost disappeared from the world. I tried to picture the cabin as it had been. Smoke from a chimney, a door opening, a woman stepping outside with flour on her hands, a man carrying firewood, maybe children running around where we were sitting. Now there was only brush, damp grass, and the sound of the lake below. After resting, we chose a small elevated clearing near the ruins and set up camp. The tent went up quickly enough. We stowed our gear, rolled out the sleeping bag, and arranged the little stove inside. Amy managed to start a fire outside using birch bark and some deadfall that was dry enough to catch. She was proud of that too, and I made sure to tell her so. Once the camp was settled, we explored the old cabin site properly. We photographed everything we found. The remains of rusted cans, so fragile with age that they looked like they might crumble if touched. A few small bottles half buried in the soil. Pieces of metal that may have belonged to an old wood stove. A bent nail. A broken hinge. A scattering of stones that might have once supported something important. We were careful not to disturb much. The site felt fragile, not haunted. Not then, just old. Eventually, the climb caught up with both of us. The air grew colder as the sun moved lower, and our sweat turned chilly beneath our layers. We smothered the fire with wet dirt and went into the tent. I got the stove going and prepared MREs while Amy shed her outer layer and stretched out on the sleeping bag. "We're gonna have fun in here tonight," she cooed, striking an exaggerated pose. "Let's eat," I said. She threw a glove at me. After dinner, I dumped the water from the pot, put everything away, refilled the stove, and joined her in the bag. We used our extra layers to prop ourselves up and scrolled through the photos on our phones, laughing at bad angles, zooming in on old objects, and talking about how excited my parents would be when they saw that we had actually found the place. We had been lying down for maybe 5 minutes when I heard a faint noise in the distance. I froze. Amy did too. "Did you hear that?" she asked. "Yeah." The sound had been so distant that at first I wasn't sure what it was. A cry, maybe. A shout. Something carried on the wind. "It sounded like it came from the lake," I said. We sat in silence, listening. The tent fabric shifted softly in the breeze. The stove hissed. Somewhere outside, a branch creaked. Then the sound came again. Faint, long, human. Amy's face changed. That was definitely a person. I didn't answer right away. The rational part of my brain tried to work quickly. It was a long weekend. People were probably out on the water. Sound carries strangely across lakes. A voice from miles away can seem close, especially at night. We had all heard stories like that. "Long weekend," I said. Voices carry on the water. Amy did not look convinced. I turned off my phone and dimmed the lantern. We listened a while longer, but heard nothing. After that, we tried to move on. Maybe it was denial. Maybe it was exhaustion. Maybe it was just the warmth of the tent and the simple fact that two people who love each other can sometimes push fear aside with closeness. What followed was the natural result of two people who had spent more than 10 hours cold, tired, and trying not to complain too much. For a little while, the noise was forgotten. Later, we stood outside in our base layers, boots, and puffers, sharing a cigarette under the open sky. The night had cleared. It was colder outside than in the tent, but the air felt clean against my face. Above us, the clouds had thinned enough to reveal stars. The lake below was hidden by the slope and trees, but I could sense it there in the dark, wide, and still. Amy leaned into me, and I rested my chin lightly against the top of her hat. Then we heard it. A long, gravelly scream for help came from the direction of the lake. Not a laugh, not a loon, not some distant party noise. A voice. A person. Help. The word dragged through the trees and seemed to hang there. Amy pulled away from me. What do we do? I stared into the dark. Nothing yet? Nothing? She snapped. What can we do from up here in the dark? Another scream came. This time it sounded southeast, directly from the lake below us. Hello? Amy shouted. We're here. Amy, I cut her off. Every wilderness horror story I had ever read suddenly poured through my head at once. People calling for help from the woods. Voices that did not belong to people. Predators, human or otherwise, using sound to pull you somewhere dark. I knew how ridiculous that sounded, but standing there on that ridge with the cold around us, it did not feel ridiculous. It felt possible. Jesus Christ, she said. Someone's hurt. It's too dangerous out there in the dark. What if it were us? That stopped me. I looked at her. Her eyes were hard. Afraid, yes, but determined. I knew that look. There would be no sleeping if we stayed. No peace. No pretending we hadn't heard what we heard. I sighed. Flashlights, water, hats, both compasses. We stay together. We don't deviate. Grab your knife. Within minutes, we were moving downhill. I led with my flashlight aimed at the unstable ground in front of me. Amy stayed close behind with the compass, giving me small corrections as we descended. The woods felt different at night. The same trees we had walked past during the day now looked like strangers. The slope seemed steeper. Roots appeared suddenly underfoot. Branches caught at our sleeves and faces. Flagging tape would be a good idea for next time, Amy said quietly. I almost laughed, but my mouth was too dry. I kept moving. If one of us got hurt, we would be in real trouble. If we took too long, whoever had called for help could be dead by morning. If we lost our way, we would become the emergency. Every step felt like a choice between bad possibilities. The descent went better than I expected. We reached the shoreline about 10 yards from the boat. Hello? Amy yelled again, sweeping the lake and the shore with her flashlight. Her voice broke across the water and disappeared. No answer. The lake was black and flat, reflecting only pieces of the sky. Our boat sat where we had left it, pulled onto the shore and tied off. Nothing moved nearby. We split up slightly, never going too far from each other, and searched the shoreline about 50 yards northeast and southwest of the boat. We checked rocks, brush, the waterline, driftwood, and any place where a person could have crawled or fallen. Amy kept calling out every few minutes. Each time she shouted, I flinched. I knew it was the right thing to do. I hated it anyway. There was no reply, no splash, no groan, no movement. When we met back at the boat, Amy's face was pale and defeated. We tried, I said softly. I don't know what else we can do until daylight. I know, she whispered. But she looked like she didn't believe herself. We stood there for another 5 minutes, listening while we split a bottle of water. Nothing. Only the quiet lap of the lake and the wind in the trees. The climb back to camp was uneventful, which somehow made it worse. No voice followed us, no scream repeated, no figure moved between the trees. We reached the tent, crawled into the sleeping bag, and lay in silence. The stove burned low. Then it went out completely. Neither of us slept much. When the sun came up, the world looked harmless again. That almost made me angry. Morning light touched the ruins, the trees, the wet grass, and the tent as if nothing strange had happened. The lake below glittered faintly through the branches. Birds called from somewhere in the woods. Everything looked normal, and that made the memory of the screams feel impossible. We packed without making breakfast. Amy was quiet. Too quiet. I tried once while rolling up the sleeping bag. We did what we could, Amy. She looked toward the lake. It's just weird, she said. There was nobody else on the lake. This part is basically a river when you think about it, I said. It could have been someone farther up, some drunk at a party, someone messing around. Either way, I have to report it. Of course, I said, it should only take a couple hours to get back to town. We carried our packs back down to the boat and crossed the water without speaking much. The lake was calm. Too calm. Every now and then, Amy looked over her shoulder toward the shoreline where we had searched. I knew she was hoping to see something. A person, a boat, a clue, anything. There was nothing. When we got back to town, we reported what had happened. Both of us gave painfully detailed accounts. Where we camped, where we heard the screams, what direction they came from, what time, how long we searched, where the boat was, what the conditions were like. The officer taking the report listened politely, wrote everything down, and asked the same questions in different ways. We tried to make the most of the rest of the weekend after that. We really did. We got food, we unpacked, we cleaned gear. We even joked a little because that is what people do when they want to prove something has not shaken them. Life continued the way it always does, carrying us forward whether we were ready or not. Days passed, then weeks. Work returned, laundry piled up, bills came due. The camping trip became something I thought about less and less. Sometimes I would remember the scream while lying in bed, and my stomach would tighten. But then morning would come, and there would be coffee to make, emails to answer, and normal things to do. By the third Monday in June, I had almost pushed it from my mind. Amy was working from home that day. I was in the basement sorting through storage bins when I heard her yell upstairs. I couldn't make out the words, but I heard the sharp panic in her voice. Then came the sound of her headset hitting the floor. I ran upstairs. What's wrong? She was sitting at her desk in the living room, staring at her computer screen. Her face had gone completely pale. One hand was raised, pointing at the monitor, but her mouth hung open without making a sound. I stepped beside her and looked. It was a social media post from that morning. The title read, "Body Found in Local Lake." My chest tightened. I read the first few lines. A body had been recovered from the same lake. The location was not exact, but it was close enough. Close enough to the place we had been, close enough to the direction of the screams. Amy stood suddenly shaking. "Amy," I said, pulling her into my arms. We did everything we could with what we had, but her body trembled against mine. It could have been us. I reached around her gently, grabbed the mouse, and closed the tab. For a while, we just stood there. I wanted to tell her it was over. I wanted to say the body explained the scream. Someone had been out there. Someone had needed help, and we had tried, and that was all there was to it. But I couldn't, because later that evening, after Amy went to bed early, I opened the article again. I read it carefully this time. The body had not been in the water for weeks. According to the first report, the person had been dead for less than 24 hours. I sat there in the glow of the screen, unable to move. Then I heard it, not from the computer, not from outside, from somewhere below the house. A long, gravelly voice, faint but clear, rising up through the floorboards. Help. Next Friday, I will retire after 23 years as a police detective in northern New York. That is a strange thing to write. For most of my life, the job has been the shape of everything. It decided when I slept, when I ate, when I missed birthdays. When I left dinner early and when I stood in rooms no person should ever have to stand in. It taught me how to look at blood without turning away. It taught me how to speak gently to grieving parents. It taught me how to sit across from a liar and wait for the lie to collapse under its own weight. Most of the cases I worked faded with time. That is not because I did not care. I did. Maybe too much when I was younger. But if you stay in this work long enough, your mind learns to protect itself. Faces blur. Names sink deeper. The details of one burglary become the details of another. The domestic calls, the overdoses, the suicides, the bodies found after too many days alone, all of it gathers in some dark room in the back of the mind. You know it is there, but you do not open the door unless you have to. A few cases never went behind that door. They stayed close. Not always because they were the bloodiest or the cruelest. Some violent scenes, as terrible as they are, still make a kind of human sense. Rage, greed, jealousy, fear. Bad impulses in bad moments. You may hate the reason, but at least there is one. The ones that stayed with me were different. They left behind a feeling that the world had shifted slightly out of place. Like you had walked into a room and found all the furniture moved an inch to the left. Not enough for anyone else to notice, but enough for you to know something was wrong. This is one of those cases. I have kept most of it to myself for years, not because I was ordered to, and not because anyone would stop me now. The truth is simpler and more embarrassing. I did not want people to look at me the way some people looked at me back then. I did not want them to hear my story, nod politely, and then decide that the years had finally worn something loose in my head. But I am done soon. My desk is mostly cleaned out. The young detectives already look at me like a piece of department furniture that will soon be removed. I have spent my life writing reports, giving statements, signing affidavits, and swearing under oath to tell the truth. So I will tell the truth here too. On Thanksgiving night in 2008, a young nurse I will call Ellen disappeared from her home. Ellen had spent most of that holiday with her parents and siblings. Later, her family described her as distracted, anxious, almost numb. They said she smiled at the right moments and answered questions when spoken to, but she was not really there. She kept glancing toward windows. She barely touched her food. When people laughed, she jumped as if the sound had startled her. Her mother noticed first. Mothers usually do. Before Ellen left that night, her mother followed her to the front hall and quietly asked if everything was all right. At first, Ellen tried to wave it away. She said she was tired. She said work had been hard. She said the hospital had been busy. All of that was believable enough. Nurses carry a lot, and most of it follows them home whether they want it to or not. But her mother kept pushing. Finally, Ellen admitted something. For the past week, she said, she had felt like someone was following her. Not in a clear way at first. She had not seen a face in a crowd or a car parked outside her house every night. It was more like a feeling that would not leave her, a pressure at her back, a sense of being watched when she walked from her car to her front door, a feeling that someone was standing just out of view whenever she turned a corner. The night before Thanksgiving, it had become worse. Ellen lived in a house on a quiet street in a nicer part of town. Her bedroom was at the front of the house, facing the sidewalk. That night, while lying awake in bed, she heard footsteps outside her window. Slow footsteps. Steady footsteps. Someone pacing back and forth along the sidewalk directly in front of her house. She told her mother the sound went on for hours. Not a quick pass. Not someone walking a dog. Not a drunk neighbor cutting across the lawn. Pacing. Back and forth. Like someone waiting for her to look. For a long time, Ellen stayed still in bed, too afraid to move. Eventually, she forced herself up and went to the blinds. She opened them just enough to see out. The street was empty. No person, no car, no movement. But the moment she looked, she heard something run. Frantic footsteps, she said, fast and uneven, fleeing down the street into the dark. Her mother was frightened by the story, partly because the neighborhood was not the kind of place where people expected such things to happen. That belief is foolish, of course. Bad things have no respect for property values, but people still believe nice homes keep the dark at a distance. Before Ellen left, both of her parents made her promise to call as soon as she got home. She never did. About an hour after she should have arrived, her parents became worried enough to drive to her house themselves. They found her car idling in the driveway. The front door stood wide open. The lights inside were on. Ellen was gone. I arrived a little after 11 that night with a couple of patrol officers. One officer stayed outside with Ellen's parents to take their statement and keep them from going back inside. His partner, Sean, came in with me to clear the house again. The parents had already looked around, but civilians do not clear houses. They move through rooms in panic, calling names afraid of what they might find and afraid of finding nothing. From the moment I stepped inside, the house felt wrong. I've never liked saying things like that because they sound dramatic and useless. A house is a house, walls, furniture, floors, smells, light. A detective is supposed to notice things that can be written down, photographed, measured, and explained. But the feeling was there. The decor was warm, earth-colored walls, low lighting, heavy rustic furniture, iron fixtures, soft rugs. Years later, my wife told me that style was called Tuscan. At the time, I just thought it looked expensive and comfortable. Everything in the house should have felt inviting. Instead, it felt ruined. Not violent, exactly. Not like walking into a room where a murder has obviously happened. There was no blood in the entryway, no overturned table, no broken lamp. But the atmosphere pressed down on me in a way I had felt only at certain death scenes. A bleakness, a certainty that something had already gone wrong and could not be repaired. As Sean and I moved through the house, I kept feeling like someone was walking directly behind me. Not following at a distance, not in another room. Directly behind me, matching my steps so perfectly that their footfalls disappeared inside my own. Every time I stopped, the feeling stopped. Every time I moved, it moved. I told myself it was nerves. It had been a long day. Thanksgiving calls are not always peaceful. Ellen's parents were crying outside. The house was open and quiet in a way that made every sound feel important. That explanation worked for about 30 seconds at a time. Sean went into the kitchen. I continued down a hallway toward the master bedroom. I remember thinking the hallway felt longer than it should have. That might have been the lighting or the layout, but it stretched in my memory like one of those dreams where the door gets farther away the more you walk. There was a bathroom on the left. The door was open. I passed it, half focused on the bedroom ahead. I was trying to understand the layout of the house, trying to listen for movement, trying to keep my hand near my service weapon without drawing too soon. Then I reached the bedroom door, and my mind snapped backward. It took one full second for me to understand what my eyes had already seen. There had been a man in the bathroom, sitting on the toilet. In the moonlight from the small bathroom window, I had clearly seen him. An elderly man, maybe in his 80s, completely nude, hunched forward with his head buried in his hands like he was in terrible pain. My body reacted after my mind did. I turned and moved quickly back into the bathroom, calling for Sean. The room was empty. The toilet was empty. No one behind the door. No window open. No place for an old naked man to hide. Sean came down the hall and asked what was wrong. Keep an eye out for someone moving through the house, I told him. You saw somebody? I looked around the bathroom again. I'm not sure, I said. Just keep your eyes open. I did not like saying that. I did not like sounding uncertain. But I had seen him. I know I had. We moved on. It became clear that Ellen's parents had not fully searched the house. I do not blame them. Fear changes what people can make themselves do. They probably opened doors, called her name, looked just far enough inside each room to hope she was not there, then moved on. When I opened the door to the master bedroom, the smell hit me. Death has a smell that no one forgets. People try to describe it as rotten or sweet or chemical, and all of those words are partly true. But none of them are enough. It is sickly and thick, a smell that seems to grab the back of the tongue. Once you know it before your eyes confirm anything. The bedroom looked ordinary at first, nothing overturned, nothing broken. A little clutter, clothes on a chair, books on a nightstand, a pair of shoes near the closet, a lived-in room, normal in all the ways it could be. I reached for the light switch. It did nothing. Every other light in the house seemed to work, but not that one. I pulled out my flashlight and stepped inside, already knowing there was a body somewhere in that room. Before I found it, something happened that I have never been able to forget. Above the bed hung a framed photograph of Ellen at the Grand Canyon. She stood smiling beside the railing, pointing out toward the landscape. Even in a still picture, she looked kind, steady. The kind of person you would trust without thinking. The kind of nurse patients remembered years later because she made them feel less afraid. As I stepped farther into the room, the frame shifted on its hook. It did not fall. It tilted downward and hung there half loose against the wall. At that new angle, Ellen was no longer pointing toward the canyon. She was pointing down at the bed. I know how that sounds. I know a loose frame can move. I know old hooks slip. I know the mind can turn accidents into meaning when it is under stress. But I was there. I saw it happen. I aimed my flashlight at the bed and leaned forward to look. The bed was empty. I let out a breath of relief. Then a rough, hoarse giggle came from my left. I turned toward the dark corner. A figure stood there. My heart kicked hard in my chest, but training took over. I drew my service weapon and ordered the figure to raise their hands. They did. Slowly, then the figure stepped forward into the moonlight. For years, I could not describe what I saw in that moment. My mind simply refused to put the image into words. It was like looking at something that had no place in the known world. And because of that, language could not attach to it properly. I will try now. It was the same old man I had seen in the bathroom. He was still naked. His skin hung from him in loose folds, as if he were wearing a suit several sizes too large. His ribs showed through the sagging flesh. His arms were thin and long. His body looked weak, almost fragile. But his head was wrong. It had changed. It stretched outward into a cluster of faces, at least 4 of them, all identical, all belonging to the same old man. They were arranged in a way that reminded me of multiple screens showing the same image from slightly different angles. Each face wore the same wide, maniacal stare. The eyes bulged outward as if something inside the skull was pushing them forward. Each mouth held a rictus grin full of dark gums and old teeth. The cheekbones were sunken so deep that every face looked skeletal. For a moment, I could not move. The thing shuffled toward me. Slowly at first, then without warning it took one sharp, aggressive step forward. My mind did not keep up. I fell backward like a child trying to escape the monster in his closet. My shoulder hit the floor. My gun stayed in my hand, but I did not fire. I could not process enough of what I was seeing to make a decision. When I hit the floor, the smell of death became overwhelming. It seemed to rise around me, thick enough to touch. I turned my head to the right. Under the bed, I saw where the smell was coming from. A young woman's body lay beneath it. She was bloated and swollen, her face distended so badly that she was nearly unrecognizable. Her limbs were twisted behind her in positions no body should hold. The skin had turned a pale green shade and faint dark lines ran beneath it, like something had begun spreading through her from the inside. It was Ellen. My mind registered that at the same time a woman screamed outside. Then I heard the other patrol officer shout, "Stop!" After that came the sound of someone running hard over gravel. I would later learn that Ellen's parents and the officer outside had all seen a nude male figure fleeing from the property. They described it moving fast, too fast for an old man, its body loose and raw. The officer later told me the man's skin looked like it was moving underwater. I looked back toward the corner. The old man was gone. Sean rushed into the bedroom a second later, asking what had happened. I could not answer him. I only pointed under the bed. The other officer chased the figure through the surrounding streets, but lost him after a few turns. No tracks led anywhere useful. No discarded clothing. No witness saw where he went. After that, the case turned messy. Cases become dangerous when the facts do not behave. People do not like gaps. They fill them with blame. I was criticized for letting a suspect escape, even though the suspect I described was dismissed almost immediately as stress, confusion, or bad lighting. My report was called unhelpful. The detail about the faces was treated as something best ignored. Even the idea that the man may have been severely deformed was brushed aside. I understood why. Nobody wanted that in the official file. Then the coroner made everything worse. Ellen had been strangled. That part was clear enough. But according to the state of decomposition, the coroner insisted she had been dead for several days. Several days. That was impossible. Her family had been with her that afternoon. They had spoken to her, touched her, watched her leave. Her car had been found warm and idling in the driveway. But decomposition does not care about witness statements, and the coroner stood by his opinion. For a short time, the investigation turned toward the family. That was ugly. Necessary, maybe, given the contradiction, but ugly. Grieving parents became possible suspects. Relatives were questioned. Timelines were torn apart. Everyone's Thanksgiving became evidence. Then surveillance footage surfaced from a gas station. It showed Ellen stopping for gas alone 55 minutes before the 911 call. She looked alive. Tired, maybe. Nervous, maybe. But alive. She paid at the pump, got back into her car, and drove away. 55 minutes later, her parents called 911 from her house. Her body, when found, looked like it had been dead for days. We never explained the man in the bathroom. We never explained the figure outside. We never explained the moving photograph, though I did not push that detail hard after I saw how people reacted to everything else. The case went cold. Over the years, we chased leads rooted in reality. Registered offenders, strange neighbors, hospital patients, former partners, drifters. Reports of suspicious old men. Every normal path a homicide investigation can take, we took. Each one ended where I expected it would, nowhere. Because the truth, or at least the part of it I saw, did not sit in reality. That is why this case has haunted me more than any other. Not because I saw a dead body. I have seen many. Not because Ellen was young and kind and did not deserve what happened. Most victims do not deserve what happens. Not even because the killer was never caught. It haunts me because I know what I saw in that house, and I know it cannot be possible. I am retiring next Friday. I will hand in my badge. I will shake hands. Someone will make a joke about fishing or golf. I will go home and try to become someone who is not always listening for bad news. But some nights, even now, I wake and hear slow footsteps outside my window. Back and forth. Back and forth. I live on a quiet street. There is never anyone there when I look, but sometimes after I close the blinds, I hear frantic footsteps running away into the dark. Story 6. It started about 3 weeks ago, or at least that's my best guess. I'm only saying 3 weeks because of the dates in the diary I found in my apartment. The handwriting looks like mine. The details feel like they should belong to me. But when I try to remember any of it directly, it's like reaching into fog. According to the first entry, my mom called to tell me my Uncle Ken had died. I wrote that I asked her who that was. I even wrote that I swore I'd never met any uncle named Ken. I can picture myself saying it, but I can't picture Ken. Not his face, not his voice, not his house, not anything. My mother, according to what I wrote, got upset right away. She thought I was messing with her. She told me those kinds of jokes weren't funny. Not when someone had just passed away. I kept insisting I wasn't joking. The more serious I got, the more she seemed to think I was committing to the bit. Then she said something that should have fixed it. She said I spent a month living at Ken's house when I was a kid. She reminded me it was when she was in the hospital and my dad was deployed overseas. She told me I was there long enough that Ken became my favorite uncle. None of that rang a bell. That's the part that scared me later, when I reread it. Not because it sounded impossible, but because I did remember the outline of what she was describing. I remembered my mom being hospitalized. I remembered being sent somewhere else for a while. I remembered the vague feeling of being in a different home, sleeping in a bed that wasn't mine. I just didn't remember an Uncle Ken. In the diary, I wrote that I tried to explain it away. Maybe my mom mixed up the relative. Maybe the month had happened at a different time. Maybe I stayed with someone else and she was confusing names. It was flimsy, but I clung to it anyway because the alternative was worse. The alternative was that a whole person had been removed from my life and I hadn't even noticed. By the end of the call, my mom's voice apparently shifted. She went from angry to worried. We hung up and her worry was about me. About how hard I insisted I didn't know someone she was swearing on the Bible was real. The funny part is that in that moment, I was more worried about her mental health than mine. That's also in the diary. I wrote that it seemed like she might be confused, or grieving, or losing it. I wrote that forgetting something from when I was 5 or 6 was weird, but it wasn't something I thought I needed to panic about. Childhood memories can be messy. Names get forgotten. Faces blur. I wrote that it picked at the back of my mind for a day, then faded into the background. Now, sitting here trying to rebuild my life from scattered notes, I can see how wrong I was. Forgetting that name mattered. It wasn't a random hole. It was the beginning of the floor giving out. After that phone call, things were mostly normal for a day or two. At least that's what I told myself. Then I got into a huge fight with my girlfriend. I'm saying my girlfriend like I know what that means. I'm only using the term because the diary says I had one, and it gives her name, Sarah. According to what I wrote, we'd been together about 2.5 years. We'd recently decided to move in together. I even wrote that last year I'd done everything perfectly for her birthday. A real storybook day. This year, I couldn't remember her birthday at all. Not like I forgot to buy a gift. Not like I lost track of the date. I mean, I couldn't remember what day she was born. I couldn't remember the month. I couldn't even guess. The information simply wasn't there in my head. I came home, asked if she wanted to order in, and apparently she looked at me in a way that made the room go cold. Because it was her birthday, and I had no idea. Reading it now, I can see why that was the moment it hit harder than the Uncle Ken call. A childhood memory being wrong is one thing, but a major detail about the person you live with, the person you supposedly love, that's not something you misplace casually. The diary says I tried to make excuses, stress, work, poor sleep. I told her about the conversation with my mom and tried to explain that something felt off, like pieces of my memory weren't where they should be. Sarah didn't want to hear it, and honestly, I get why. If I were her, I'd assume I was being lied to. I forgot your birthday because I'm having memory problems. Sounds exactly like the kind of excuse someone makes when they mess up and want sympathy. My attempt to make her birthday special at the last second apparently made it worse. It came off fake, like damage control. We fought. I wrote that her anger turned into a look of frustrated concern, like she didn't know whether to be furious or scared. That whole week, the 2 incidents stayed in my head. The dead uncle I couldn't remember. The girlfriend's birthday I couldn't find in my mind. It made me walk around with this heavy feeling, like I was holding a glass of water and waiting for the moment I'd spill it. And still I tried to convince myself nothing was wrong. It's embarrassing to admit, but denial is comfortable. Life keeps moving and you want to keep moving with it. I went through my normal routines. I went to the store, I watched TV, I ate, I slept. I acted like I wasn't constantly checking my mind for missing pieces. But Sarah noticed. The diary mentions scoffs and side eyes and that her usual bright smile had been replaced by something tighter. She kept watching me like she was trying to figure out if I was playing some weird game. Then it slipped again. This time it wasn't a name or a date. This time it was my whole life. I was driving, my daily commute according to the diary. when I realized I didn't know where I was going. I knew I had a job. I knew I drove to it almost every day. I even knew the kind of work I did. The diary says I was a facilities manager, but I couldn't place the building. I drove around for hours, apparently, trying to trigger recognition. I took turns without knowing why. I stared at signs and expected something to click. It didn't. The city stayed unfamiliar in a way that made my skin prickle. Eventually, I got a phone call. The general manager at the property I worked at asked if I was coming in. Their tone was light at first, like they thought I was just running late. Haha, okay. Is that a no, or are you just running late? I can imagine that conversation now, and it makes me feel sick. How do you explain that to someone without sounding insane? How do you say, I forgot where my job is, and expect them to treat you like an adult? Apparently, the conversation didn't go well. I was cleared for extended PTO. Over the next few days, I lost even more. The diary says I forgot the name of the company I worked for. It says they tried to call and text me, and that I probably ignored it because I thought it was spam. The idea of that is terrifying. People reaching out, trying to help, and my brain casually labeling them as meaningless noise. Eventually, they placed me on leave. There's an email mentioned in the diary. I couldn't return without written clearance from a doctor. So I tried to see a doctor. The diary says it took nearly a full week just to navigate the referrals to see a neurologist. And during that week, my memory kept getting worse. Every day stole something else. Conversations became harder because I kept hitting blank spaces. I'd start a sentence and realize I didn't know what I was talking about. I'd look at someone I knew and not be able to pull their name up like the file was missing. By the time Sarah agreed, begrudgingly, to drive me to the appointment, just speaking was exhausting. On the way there, according to the diary, she couldn't believe I didn't know her parents' names. She thought I was being cruel on purpose. Then she watched me fill out paperwork at the office and realized I couldn't even remember my own birthday. That's the moment I wish I could revisit, because if I had seen the look on her face, maybe I would have understood how serious it was. Or maybe I did understand and I was just trapped inside it. The neurologist didn't take it seriously, at least not at first. That's what the diary says. Shallow nods. Unenthusiastic expression. The kind of body language that tells you someone has already decided what you are. My symptoms, mixed with Sarah's angry recounting, probably sounded like relationship drama. Like I'd forgotten her birthday, got caught, and now I was inventing a medical excuse. They did imaging. It didn't show anything obvious. I wrote that it was inconclusive. I also wrote down some of the questions the doctor asked, but the questions are meaningless to me now. They're basic stuff. My mom's name, where I was born, who the current president is, the simple questions you should answer without thinking. I struggled with them. Every time I hesitated, the doctor looked unimpressed. The more I struggled, the more nervous I got, and the worse I performed. It became a loop. Panic makes memory harder. Memory failure makes panic worse. In the end, according to the diary, the doctor blamed stress and lack of sleep. He didn't say I was lying, but he hinted it. He hinted I was trying to smooth things over with Sarah. He implied the timing was convenient. Even with that attitude, they drew blood and told me they'd call with results. They stressed that I should answer the phone because if it was something serious, they'd need to act quickly. The diary says I didn't answer a single call afterward. It says things got worse fast. I forgot my girlfriend's name. When I read that line, I sat here staring at the paper for a long time, trying to feel something: sadness, shock, guilt. But it's hard to feel guilt for a memory you don't have. I can't picture Sarah. I can't hear her voice. I can't pull up her face. All I have is the knowledge that I once loved someone, and then at some point, I couldn't even remember her name. Apparently, that was the final straw. She decided to move out. The diary says there was a screaming match, her grabbing essentials, her leaving quickly. And only after she was gone did I find the diary, something that let me catch up, at least briefly. I wrote that I read through it and realized the current date by the time I grabbed my phone to call her and apologize. The memories of our relationship had slipped away again. I forgot why I was holding the phone. I put it down. I went back to cleaning the apartment like a machine, following a routine. Then there was a voicemail. A strange one from a caller who seemed to know who I was. The diary says it was about test results. It says the message implied everything looked normal and I could call back if I had questions. That sentence keeps repeating in my head now. Call back if you have questions. How could I not have questions? But I must have listened to that voicemail and forgotten it seconds later. Because the diary says, I forgot I went to the doctor. It says, I forgot that I was forgetting. Now I'm here. The last entry in the diary is dated 3 days ago, I think. I'm only saying 3 days because the computer screen in front of me shows a date, and I'm trying to trust it. I can't remember anything anymore. Not in a steady way. Not in a way that lasts. The notes in this diary are the only stable thing I have left. They're the only proof that yesterday existed. My voicemail inbox is full. The voices are worried. Some sound angry, some sound like they've been crying. None of the names mean anything to me. I keep thinking they must have the wrong number, except the messages keep repeating details that match what's written here. They all sound scared. And I keep hoping they reach the right person soon. There's an ID in a wallet I found near the door. It says my name is James Cuniff. It says I'm 28. It says I live in Las Vegas. I've been staring at that card like it's a prop from someone else's life. I know what the words mean, but they don't attach to anything inside my head. I keep sitting down at the computer to post about what's happening, to ask for help, to tell someone that my mind is collapsing in real time. But every time I open the page, I see it's already been posted. I read my own words on the screen. Words I don't remember typing, explaining that I can't remember anything. That I found a diary that people keep calling. That I might be James Cuniff. That I might be 28. That I might live in Las Vegas. And then I refresh again later, and it's still there. Like I'm stuck in a loop. Like I keep crawling back to the same point, because it's the only point that still exists. I don't know how long I can keep writing these notes. I don't know what happens when I forget how to read them. I don't know what happens when I forget what a diary is, or what a phone is. All I know is that someone named Ken died, and I didn't know who he was. And now I'm starting to wonder if that was the first thing taken from me, or just the first thing I noticed was missing.